for governor.
Another big race on the ballot in Tennessee, the U.S. Senate race. Marsha Blackburn winning that race, and we turn now to John Becker, who is in the stateroom with the latest on those results. John.
Robin, Beth, good evening. It was a stunner just because of the timing called by NBC barely an hour after the polls closed. We'll break this down momentarily with some of our analysts, but first to the winning campaign. Stephanie Haynes joins us live in Middle Tennessee with the Blackburn campaign. Stephanie.
Hey, good evening. Yes, it was an early night, a party night for the Blackburn campaign here. As the night went on, it crescendoed into higher and higher energy. First, when we heard that Bill Lee would be the governor-elect of the state of Tennessee, and then when the network started projecting that Blackburn would win, the energy just grew and grew. She came on stage with her entire family. She thanked Phil Bredesen for a hard-fought race. She stuck to everything that she had talked about in the campaign, building that border wall, bringing her Tennessee values to Washington. Here's what she had to say.
Tennesseans want to make certain that they have leaders who are not going to kick a can down the road on the issues that affect our nation, that affect our children. They want leaders who are going to tackle the big problems.
And preceding her were a couple of country music stars. In fact, it was John Rich from Big and Rich and Gretchen Wilson. Marsha Blackburn exited the stage after she gave her speech, and she didn't do a media gaggle, so we didn't hear any more from her from that speech, but we will be hearing more from her as she becomes the senator-elect of Tennessee, the first female Tennessee senator, U.S. senator-elect. Back to you.
Stephanie Haynes with our coverage from the Blackburn campaign. Want to turn to her Democratic rival, Phil Bredesen, who lost this race. You can see we heard about that blue wave across the country, a red wall in the state of Tennessee. Mark Salinger joins us live from the Bredesen campaign. Mark.
Yeah, John, there was a lot of excitement early on in the night, but that was quickly turned way down. You can see behind me right now, they're already taking down the lights. There's ladders behind me. This is all over. Now, Phil Bredesen's first words when he got on stage to give his concession speech, "I applied for this job and got a rejection letter." That pretty much says it all. Now, his concession speech did send a positive message with a positive outlook for the future of the Democratic Party in Tennessee. He also says that he gave a phone call to Marsha Blackburn to concede to her.
I did try to call Marsha Blackburn before I came down, and she was on stage apparently, but I do want to take this opportunity to congratulate her on her win.
I spoke with a member of the Tennessee Democratic Party, and he was telling me that he believes that the Dems didn't do enough to get the rural vote. That's where he says that he believes that Marsha Blackburn gained all those votes enough to propel her to be the next senator from the state of Tennessee.